Okay, just a couple of things on biography, just on one page. 245. An authorized biography cannot be trusted in the same way that a definitive biography can be. Instead of reading it simply as history, the reader should understand that it may be biased, that this is the way the reader is expected to think of the book's subject. This is the way his friends and associates want him to be known to the world. So if you write an autobiography, you're obviously going to put yourself in a good light, usually. And you're going to ignore some things. Maybe some things you don't think were significant, but that a biographer, someone else, someone who's writing on you, does think it is important. Continuing. The authorized biography is a kind of history, but it is a history with a difference. We may be curious to know what interested persons want the public to know about someone's private life, but we should not expect to know what the private life really was. The reading of an authorized biography will thus often tell us much about the time in which it was written, about its customs and manners, about those actions and attitudes that were acceptable, and by implication, and with a little extrapolation, about those that were not. But we should not hope to discover the real life of a human being any more than we would hope to know the real story of a war if we read the communications of only one side. To get at the truth, we must read all the communications, ask people who were there, and use our own minds to make sense out of the muddle. A definitive biography has already done this work. In the case of an authorized biography, and most biographies of a living person are of this sort, there is still much to do. So let me just maybe say, in case people don't know, biography is you write on a person, someone else. An autobiography is you do your own story, you write in your own life. An authorized biography means that someone else wrote on a person's life, and that person signed off that he accepts what's in the book. He agrees with it, he's okay with it, he endorses it that it's factual, that it includes all the important parts of his life, all the significant parts. Usually they work together on the book. Those are authorized biographies. What he's saying here is that authorized biographies and autobiographies are suspect because, well, the person is writing his own story. Biographies, of course, are not the truth. If someone else writes a biography on someone, biographies can also be biased because the person, the author, is writing it, and they might have disingenuous views. And so, in the same way as history, you're going to read a biography, you should read more than one. Or, unless you're not too worried about the bias. If you don't really care about their personal lives, like if you want to read a biography on Charles Darwin, and you don't really care about his personal life, then just read his autobiography, or John Stuart Mill's autobiography. If you really care about his womanizing and his childhood, then if you want something maybe closer or at least contributes to the truth, then you might want to read a biography. But if you just care about what the author felt was important for his life, then read the autobiography, and that's probably all you need. There's another part in here which I don't know if I made a note of. Maybe I did. He says that, here's some more actually. This is on page 246. Some biographies are didactic. They have a moral purpose. Not many of this sort are written anymore, but they used to be common. They are still written for children, of course. Plutarch's Lives of the Noble Grecians and Romans is such a work. By the way, I have read part of Plutarch's Lives. It's actually fantastically written, even though it's translated. And was written a long time ago, like 2,000 years ago, about in the Roman era. The stories, he contrasts two different heroes and their character. It's actually really neat. It's strangely captivating. It keeps you reading. It holds you. Where was I? Plutarch told those stories of great men of the Greek and Roman past in order to help his contemporaries to be great also, and to help him avoid the errors into which the great so often fall, or so he felt. The Lives is a marvelous book, but although many of the accounts are the only ones we have of their subjects, we do not read it so much for its biographical information as for its view of life in general. That's why this book has been included as part of the great works in in Adler. Adler put together a selection of the great works, and Plutarch's Lives is included, and that's for that reason. One more piece about biographies. Autobiographies present some different and interesting problems. First of all, it is questionable whether anyone has ever written a true autobiography. If it is difficult to know the life of anyone else, it is even more difficult to know one's own. And of course, all autobiographies have to be written about the lives that are not yet complete. So of course, an autobiography is written by someone still alive and his life isn't over. So they're never complete. He's saying whether they're true, because of course you may not want to reveal certain things. Bill Clinton's autobiography, not going to be everything in there. Sorry about that. That just doesn't happen. And the other point here was about, he says here that it's harder to know your own life than someone else's. And I think it's probably because not only are the events surrounding you different from your perspective, you also probably under or overestimate certain things about what you do. Essentially, it's hard to write when you're egocentric, and anyone else who might enjoy the work, like it's easy to write an autobiography if only you're going to read it, like if it's a journal. But if you're writing it for the purposes of other people reading it, then you can't write from a me perspective. It's got to be a perspective of my place in something, in my family, in my career, in my successful business, in my, public intellectual career, whatever, right? So, anyways. Okay, philosophy. A mind not agitated by good questions cannot appreciate the significance of even the best answers. It is easy enough to learn the answers, but to develop actively inquisitive minds, alive with real questions, profound questions, that is another story. I think that's actually a plight of schooling today. It's very easy to memorize and to learn facts, but to connect them, to apply them, and to abstract from them and derive new questions. Can that be taught? It's more difficult. It's not as easily tested, and it's possible that few of us truly command it, which is why there only is ever few movers of the world, or the shoulders of giants. There's only few giants among us because of that. Now, 271, but we do want you to recognize that one of the most remarkable things about the great philosophical books is that they ask the same sort of profound questions that children ask. I thought that was interesting. Like, why are we here, and where are we going? What's life after death? Where did my dead fish go? Did it go to heaven, or was my dead goldfish a Christian? And was my child that died in childbirth, did it go to heaven, or did it go to limbo? That kind of stuff. Why is the sky blue? Where are we? What is man's purpose? What is the aim of life? Why do we live? Those kinds of innocent questions. Okay, 277. Up to about 1930, or perhaps even a little later, philosophical books were written for the general reader. Philosophers hoped to be read by their peers, but they also wanted to be read by ordinary intelligent men and women. Since the questions that they asked and tried to answer were of concern to everyone, they thought that everyone should know what they thought. Unfortunately, today, philosophy has become very technical. And, what book was I reading this in? I was reading a book that talked about that when philosophy or any topic gets specialized and when it gets out of the public's hands and becomes jargon laden, it is a mature field, and period. And a new emerging field has the opposite properties. A new emerging field remains connected with the public, and then later specializes into a field that is strictly jargon-laden and not for the public. I just thought I'd add that. Now here's something that I've had difficulty with. Sometimes it's hard to know the difference. This is in regards to what's the difference between a scientific and a philosophical question. Page 277. If your question were scientific, you would know that to answer it, you would have to perform some kind of special research, either by way of developing an experiment to test your answer, or by way of observing a wide range of phenomena. If your question were historical, you would know that you would also have to perform research, although of a different kind. But there is no experiment that will tell you what all existing things have in common, precisely in respect to having existence. There are no special kinds of phenomena that you can observe, no documents that you can seek out and read, in order to find out what change is or why things change. All you can do is reflect upon the question. There is, in short, nothing to do but think. You are not thinking in a total vacuum, of course. Philosophy, when it is good, is not pure speculation, such as thinking divorced from experience. Ideas cannot be put together just any way. They are stringent tests of the validity of answers to philosophical questions. And just putting a cap on this area, to avoid such difficulties, it is necessary to be able to distinguish the truly philosophical questions from the other questions that a philosopher may deal with, but that he should have waived and left for later scientific investigation to answer. So there's certainly the conflation is there. And continuing on now, this is page 280. So there's 4 kinds of philosophical styles that he talks about. And I'm just going to go through each of them. So the first one is the philosophical dialogue. First started with Plato and his dialogues. It says here that the first philosophical style of exposition, first in time if not in effectiveness, is the one adopted by Plato in his dialogues. The style is conversational. And quoting more about Plato, he says, "In the hands of a master like Plato, this style is heuristic. That is, it allows the reader, indeed leads him, to discover things for himself. When the style is enriched by the high drama, some would say the high comedy, of the story of Socrates, it becomes enormously powerful." He also says that a few others have tried this style, such as Berkeley and Cicero, but not at all close to the success that Plato used it. The next kind of philosophical style is the essay, first started with Aristotle. He says, apparently Aristotle had dialogues, but none of them survived. They're destroyed or lost. On page 282, the clarity of both Kant and Aristotle may be said to consist in the order that they impose on a subject. We see a philosophical beginning, middle, and end. This philosophical style is developed through straightforward exposition rather than through the conflict of positions and opinions as in Plato. The third style is the Meeting of Objections, the philosophical style developed in the Middle Ages and perfected by St. Thomas Aquinas and his Summa Theologica. Aquinas' style is a combination of question raising and objection meeting. And now on 283. It is Aquinas' explicit recognition of conflicts, his reporting of different views, and his attempt to meet all possible objections to his own solutions. The idea that the truth somehow evolves out of opposition and conflict was a common medieval one. Philosophers in Aquinas' time accepted as a matter of course that they should be prepared to defend their views in open, public disputes, which were often attended by crowds of students and other interested persons. The fourth kind is the systemization of philosophy. In the 17th century, a fourth style of philosophical exposition was developed by two notable philosophers, Descartes and Spinoza. Fascinated by the promised success of mathematics in organizing man's knowledge of nature, they attempted to organize philosophy itself in a way akin to the organization of mathematics. So if you've seen anything by Spinoza, for example, I recall one of his papers on the existence of God. He actually has just almost like mathematical statements, short statements in which he uses proofs to make a deductive argument towards the existence. Spinoza carried the conception even farther. His Ethics is written in strict mathematical form, with propositions, proofs, corollaries, lemmas, scholiums, and the like. The fifth is the Aphoristic Style, which is you could consider like poetry. The book here says that he doesn't think it's as important as the other four, but certainly examples would include Nietzsche's Thus Spake Zarathustra, and I encourage you to check that out because it's actually pretty good. And as well, he doesn't mention it. I don't think he mentions it, but Confucius, I think, would follow that. This on page 285. The author is like a hit-and-run driver. He touches on a subject, he suggests truth or insight about it, and then runs off to another subject without properly defending what he has said. Thus, although the aphoristic style is enjoyable for those who are poetically inclined, it is irritating for serious philosophers who would rather try to follow and criticize an author's line of thought. So, Confucius is an easy example. His Analects. He also makes a point that you should read original work rather than reading books that people write about philosophers. You really should go to the original source and attempt it for yourself. It may be difficult depending on the work, and you may then want to read what other people say about it, but you must tie what they say to the real work. Perhaps they quote the work, which is great, but if they don't, you need to find where their opinions are grounded in the work. Because otherwise, rather than reading Plato, you just simply know some guy's opinion on Plato, and that's not good enough. And as he writes on page 291, your responsibility is only to make up your own mind. In the presence of the long conversation that the philosophers have carried on through their books, you must judge what is true and what is false. It is the most distinctive mark of philosophical questions that everyone must answer them for himself. And I think that's why Adler and Van Doren appreciate most the dialogue method, because as was mentioned, it requires you to make up your own mind on the topic, as if you were there and you could have taken the place of one of those people in the dialogue and you could have answered Socrates yourself. That, I think, is philosophy has to be digested. It can't be learned like history or learned like science, mathematics. Philosophy requires that you think about these issues and you come up with your own positions. Okay, just now a couple things on theology which I thought were interesting.